Hello, welcome to ActonTV. I'm Mike Gowing, Board President and founder of ActonTV. Today's interview regarding the upcoming election where Acton voters are to decide on a contested school committee race, but more importantly, a $6.6 million operational override that is also on the ballot at the local election, April 30th, held at R.J. Gray Junior High School. This will represent an historic vote on an override. It will be the first time in 20 years that Acton has voted on an operational override. If you're unsure about what an override means, it requires a bit of a history lesson. In the early 1980s, Massachusetts voters approved Proposition 2.5, limiting the percentage a community can raise the tax levy a year over year by 2.5% plus new growth. New growth is new construction or major reconstruction. It came about because of the frustration voters felt with the profligate spending by communities and school districts across the state each year. During the early years following it, there were many override votes as cities and towns across the Commonwealth struggled with how to balance their budgets under the new law. Some succeeded, some failed. In Acton, 5 operational override votes succeeded and 3 failed in the first 25 years after the Proposition 2.5 went in place. The largest and latest during that time was for $3.8 million in 2005. It passed. Now, 20 years later, we're faced with another operational override in our town. This one is considerably larger. The lion's share of this override is being driven by the schools. I'm joined today by my guest, Corinne Hogseth, who has been a resident for over 20 years and has had 3 children go through the AB school system. She's here to share her views on the override, representing her group, Keep Acton Affordable. Welcome, Corinne.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me, Mike.
All right. As indicated in the introduction, it's been 20 years since Acton has had a Proposition 2.5 operational override. Given the length of time and with the recent increase in inflation, wouldn't an override be more appropriate?
Well, first I'll say I've been here for close to 26 years. So I was here for the last 2 overrides. I recall them. But the short answer to your question is no. The issue here is that we have 1,000 fewer students than we did 15 years ago in our school system. If we'd had steady enrollment, then you could probably, argue that inflation isn't, 2.5% isn't enough to keep up with inflation. But the fact is we've, got 17% fewer students than we did at peak enrollment in 2009. And rather than allow our school system to just get smaller naturally through attrition, our school leaders decided to go for lower class sizes. And in fact, we have more teachers and administrators than we did when we were at peak enrollment. The result has been a huge increase in per pupil spending. Over the last 10 years, cumulative inflation is about 32%. But the increase in our per pupil expenditure is 67%. And that is just clearly not sustainable. Mm-hmm. We do have some neighbors that have dealt with overrides very recently. Belmont, for example, just passed an $8.6 million override. But in the last 10 years, their high school has added 24% enrollment. Groton, on the other hand, just defeated a $5.5 million override. And at Groton-Dunstable High School, their enrollment is down 21% in the last 10 years. And to compare apples to apples, our high school is down 16% in that same amount of time. So we're more in the Groton situation, and we should be looking to certainly slow down our spending rather than ramping it up at this point.
Okay. All right, Corinne, your ballot question advocacy group is called Keep Acton Affordable. What are you hearing from seniors and others on fixed or limited income?
They're afraid. The people I've heard from are, one person that contacted me is a renter whose rent is going to go up $200 a month. She went to high school here. She's had a business here in town for decades. And she's also worried that the rent on her business property is going to go up too. So she's very worried about being priced out of town and doesn't have the money to move. I have, another acquaintance who's lived in town for over 40 years, and she's very active in several of the clubs in town, the women's club and the gardening club, and she's, raised her kids here, very active in the schools, continues to be a supporter of the schools, always has been. But, she's been paying her taxes on her own in her house. And She recently had some health issues. She had to, now deal with large, medical bills coupled with a loss of a secure income. And she said, in her words, that tax bill started to really mean something. And so to her, she calls this override the last straw. People also need to understand that this override is permanent. And the ALG, the tax increases won't start here. The Acton Leadership Group is projecting a 23% increase in our taxes from what they are at right now, which is an average of about 14%, up to over $17,000 in FY29. And that is before they discuss any other overrides, including, a likely debt exclusion override to replace the Public Works building, and that'll be about $40 million. That'll add, I don't know, $350 or $400 to the average tax bill. Mm-hmm. And I think people, to put things into perspective, people might recall the sticker shock when they opened their tax bill a few years ago and saw huge jumps in their property taxes as we started paying the bills for the new twin school. $6.6 million doesn't sound like a lot when you compare it to the construction cost of a new building, but because this override is permanent, it will actually have a greater impact on the individual property tax bill.
Okay. So what type of individuals are you attracting to keep Acton affordable?
Okay. Well, there's some people who were definite no's from the beginning. We were active in trying to pass a budget amendment a couple of years ago at town meeting to reduce this Acton's portion of the school assessment by about a little over $1 million, because we were concerned that the schools were continuing to rely too much on reserves to pay for ongoing operations. They also didn't consider inflation, which was historically high at that time, or the fact that they were going to be renewing the teacher's contract the following spring. They were already projecting a very large shortfall 2 and 3 years out. Mm-hmm. And it turned out that the shortfall was much larger than they had anticipated at the time, and it came sooner. And we think it was because they didn't really listen to our concerns at the time. There are other people who are working with us who I think are really surprised to find themselves voting no. They've never voted no on an override. They've been huge supporters of the town. They've volunteered on committees and boards and organizations throughout town. But for them, what tipped them over into the no column for a lot of them was when the town and the school switched out of the Acton Health Insurance Trust for providing health insurance for employees to a larger organization that's called Maya. They're going to realize savings for that. And through that, they could have lowered the property tax override from $6.6 million down to $5.4, but they chose not to. They chose to keep that $1.2 million in their back pocket for something else, probably to be added to your tax bill next year. Over time, once they've fully transitioned out of the Acton Health Insurance Trust, the savings will be closer to $2 million a year. But as things stand right now, taxpayers will not see that benefit.
Oh, interesting. All right. Well, what do you think the proponents of this override are not considering?
I think the main thing that they're not considering is the impact on our seniors, really. And we keep hearing that there shouldn't really be such a connection between the budget and the enrollment because education has changed. That's kind of their mantra. Well, so has aging. People are living longer. Health insurance is more expensive. Health care is more expensive. Long-term care can be a crippling expense for many seniors. And so, like I said earlier, a lot of people are worried about being priced out of their homes and outliving their savings. Some people I've seen online have just said to these seniors who are concerned about their property taxes, well, you can get a property tax abatement. And there are some programs in town to help seniors with their property taxes. Some of them don't really provide meaningful relief. Others just allow you to defer your taxes until you sell your home, which some people, resent being put in that position because, again, they've paid their taxes for decades and now they can't afford to pay their taxes. Right. And then there's another program I learned of recently where it's not so much tax abatement as it is work. And so this is a program where people can go and work a part-time minimum wage job for the town in order to pay their taxes, which seems like, to me personally, a really disrespectful way to treat our seniors, that in retirement we should put them to work to pay their taxes. So I think that suggestion that people just go straight to abatements it's flippant and it's actually not, it won't address all the issues. There's about an $800,000 set aside for that on $115 million in taxes. Mm-hmm. So it's not a really it can't have a meaningful impact for most people.
Well, and that's fine if you're a homeowner. What happens to renters?
Well, of course, renters can't get tax abatement, and neither can their landlords. They wouldn't qualify.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a big thing too. Like I said, a lot of the people that are concerned, that people that are more on the edge, I think economically, are renters, and they will be hurt by this override as well.
Hence the name, Keep Acton Affordable.
Yes.
All right, so my last question is this. Corinne, what advice would you give to the select board and to the school committee going forward?
I would ask them to please do better. In order to pass an override, the onus is on the school committee and the select board to show to us that they have been good stewards of our money and honest brokers throughout this budget process. And I would argue that they have been neither. The school committee, they identified possible long-term structural savings, to save us money after they get the tax increase. And one of them was the potential closure of Conant, the Conant School. As soon as they were done with the budgeting process, and zipped this all up and got this question approved by the Board of Selectmen, the very next meeting they were talking about what steps would be taken to replace the Conant building. They ultimately wisely decided not to move forward with that because they understand that they don't know, without knowing the outcome of this override vote, they don't know if they could pursue that. But it makes you wonder, if they knew that the override had already passed, would they be moving forward with building a new school? Again, I mentioned earlier, we're down 1,000 students in the last 15 years. 500 of that is K through 6, which is more students than we have in the Conant building right now. They are projecting this enrollment at the schools to remain steady for the next 10 years. So there's no reason to be building a new elementary school at this point in time. For the town, I would say a couple things. One, they need to start holding the schools accountable, the school system. They need to stop acting like adjunct school committee members and start acting like select board members and looking out for all of our residents. And that includes reducing the override, trying to minimize the impact on the override when they had the opportunity to do so. And they didn't. And that just, to me, showed that they were not really interested in truly minimizing the impact on taxpayers. So.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to give you an opportunity to do a little broadcast work here and hold up your sign.
These are the signs.
You may have seen these signs around town. Now you know who's behind them.
Yep.
Okay, I'd like to thank my guest, Corinne Hogseth, again. For those interested in learning more about the topic, you can go to the group's website at keepactonaffordable.org. And I'd like to thank you for watching Acton TV.